Happy Halloween from Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. And, I guess thanks to Louisiana sports teams for really living up to the scary time of year with the Halloween stuff, because it was a rough football weekend for sure. And when we were originally going to record this on Tuesday, I thought, I'll grab a Pelicans colored shirt and we'll wear that to record because the football teams have been kind of struggling. And then the Pels blow a 20-point lead and lose by almost 20 to the Warriors. And so I guess it's just, getting into the spirit of the season with Louisiana sports right now. How are things out in Austin, Samuel?
Great. It's the weather is cooling. I was, brewing some leaves off the deck earlier. It's actually still too warm that my pumpkins that I carved got moldy and had to be composted. But things are doing well. Things are doing.
Did you carve pumpkins? You guys had a nice little cutesy relationship night and carved some pumpkin. Are you a good pumpkin carver?
So Allison and I have gone to pumpkin carving contests for years when we lived in New Orleans. I personally never put my best foot forward, as they were done on Sunday nights, in that prime time slot where it's Sunday Night Football or it's Game of Thrones night. That's the era that we're living in. So Alice and I did it Sunday afternoon, after the witching hour. So the beginning of those 3:30 p.m. games, we put the speaker at the window so I could listen to them, the early parts. And I was like, oh, there's still daylight. I can do two things at once. And I did put my best foot forward. I made a cat, which I can share with all 13 of our listeners after. And it was incredible. I made this lovely cat, pumpkin carving, and then it disintegrated during my Tennessee trip. And it was really heartbreaking to compost it yesterday, 2 days before Halloween, or now a day before Halloween.
Well, I mean, jack-o'-lanterns only last so long. It's kind of part of their MO is they're only going to be there for a couple weeks, maybe, if even.
And they had potential to be...
Sorry for your loss.
Thank you. I had the potential to be spooky for much, much longer.
I had no idea any of this was going to happen. Truly incredible, and I'm glad that we got here. But as hard as it is to look back and harp too much on some of what we saw on the football field this weekend, I am really fascinated in this LSU and A&M dynamic and where it's gotten over the last few years. You and I talked before. I was pretty adamant for the first several years A&M was in the SEC that as much as the league was trying to force the A&M and LSU rivalry, that it just really wasn't that for quite a while. And then it seems like around the time of the 7 overtime game that a switch has flipped, and now obviously the home teams are winning every year, but also year over year, it seems like the recruiting trail between these two programs just continues to heat up. And there's a little bit of animosity between the programs, even on the recruiting trail, trying to go after some of Louisiana and Texas's top talent. What is the significance to you of some of the success on the field for A&M in recent years, including this one where they clearly went into that game with a chip on their shoulder and got another win against the Tigers in College Station, and now hope to kind of build on that, not just on the field, but on the recruiting trail?
Yeah, the A&M, you're exactly right. It almost felt like a forced rivalry for the first couple of, installments of this game, up until that 7 overtime thriller. But leading into that thriller, from a recruiting angle, those recruiting battles has started to kind of surface leading into that game. It's maybe for the diehards only, but now, fast forward several years, and it's, obviously they're both in the SEC. For a time, they were both in the same SEC West. Of course, LSU recruits Texas, and of course, Texas A&M under Jimbo Fisher's staff and now Mike Elko's staff has especially tried to recruit at least the best players in Louisiana, and that includes this current class. Last year's class, they had a commitment from Dominic McKinley. They're trying obviously with the 2027 quarterbacks. Pop Houston is high on their list. They just had Elijah Haven from Dunham rather. on campus. And they're also trying to make a dent in the 2026 class, getting Lamar Brown back on campus for the third time since working out on the defensive line there in the summertime. This has been a theme. They made a run at Keelan Moses, trying to flip an LSU legacy. So it's to me, winning this game, obviously, it kind of just shows, I think, the difference between a Mike Elko coach team and a Jimbo Fisher coach team, and the way this staff is assembled, because there's always been talent on both sides of this rivalry. Maybe a more fair or more fair coaching advantage for A&M or LSU, depending on the year or the venue, rather. But there's always been talent on the side. The recruiting battles are intense. A&M has recruiting momentum, and it's what's cool about Mike Elko is you can see it out west. They have players committed from Arizona, Utah, California, and they're trending for one of the best in the 2026 class in Brandon Arrington from out west. But they're also doing so, in Louisiana, in Texas, and across the Southeast. They landed a commitment from 2 top 30 players, top 5 players at their position in Aaron Gregory, a receiver, Jordan Breeze Carter, a defensive lineman. This momentum is real. We always say it's never about one game, but when it is a rivalry game and it's in prime time and you have an electric environment, that can sway a recruit to say, I could see myself being here, if they're already considering them or just beginning to consider them. And I think that's the case we've seen with A&M so far. 3, I believe, commitments already in, and the needle continued moving in the right direction for them with a lot of their top targets.
It felt like I do the high school statement wins every week with, top Louisiana high school, quote unquote, statement wins, and whatever that statement may be. It felt a little bit like a statement win for A&M. And if it didn't feel like that on Saturday night with the way that they finished that game, certainly some of the comments coming out of the game in terms of Mike Elko emphasizing this is a real football program, which I texted you about on Sunday. It felt like one of those old Jimmy Smith subtweets out into the ether where you say it and it's vague enough that everyone starts getting defensive. And I saw LSU fans feeling like it was about Brian Kelly. I saw immediately Democrats and Republicans out of nowhere jumping on each other's cases. But it felt like that was more, and maybe some of it is sparked by the stance of LSU not taking A&M as seriously in a lot of ways, recruiting trail or whatever it may be through the years. But it was more about, this isn't the Jimbo Fisher Aggies that people have kind of criticized through the years. This is a program that is going to actually cash in on the talent level and go put results on the field at a really high level. And quite frankly, from sitting at my desk in Baton Rouge, this is the most worried I have felt about Texas A&M in terms of actually being a real player on a really big scale that I can remember ever being the case.
Yeah, this college football season, as traditionally, it always feels like kind of fluid sometimes through the first couple of weeks. This year more than any. But I think, after kind of flirting with Georgia and then Texas, I do think Georgia is probably the best team in the SEC. And I think at this point in the season, my money is on A&M to be the number 2 team playing in that SEC championship game. As we talked about off air, is I covered a lot of those kids that are now at A&M. A lot of them are homegrown talents. And a lot of them were incredible high school football players. And we're not just talking about 4 stars and really good players. We're talking about borderline 5-star kids like Shamar Turner from DeSoto and DJ Hicks, who was a top 10 or 12 player in the country out of Katy Paytow. Those are along with transfer Nick Scourton, who was incredible coming out of Bryan, Texas, and an All-American talent on that defensive line. Shamar Stewart from Florida. These are blue chippers that were in the top 20 and 30 ranked, and all of them are on the same defensive line. And even though Marcel Reed definitely jump-started that offense, Le'Veon Moss is someone that obviously tested out of the water at his senior year, going into his senior year. And Marcel Reed just adds a whole other dynamic threat where you can run the ball and play that level of defense. It's no surprise that that's the recipe for success in the SEC.
Yeah, Le'Veon's been having himself a hell of a season this year. was talking, I guess, interacting online during the game with LSU fans, and it seemed like some folks were, whether it be on the broadcast or just talking about the opportunity for him to play his hometown Tigers and whatnot. But he's just been having that type of a year all year long, and we'll see how it all shakes out in terms of this season. It has been a really up and down season in terms of just you don't see the same level of dominant consistency from any programs right now that we've seen in so many seasons past. And I don't know how much of that is just this year and how much of that is the nature of NIL and the transfer portal making it tough to have guys stick around and kind of grow through your program. And so you're building that cohesiveness on the fly over and over again every single year. But in terms of just the stability of where A&M is and having, having been impressed with Elko this weekend, I certainly think they're on better footing moving forward than I've necessarily felt for quite a while. And you had a story this weekend as well, or early this week. You mentioned Lamar Brown, the U-High standout, who was out in College Station again. The Aggies have felt like one of the most notable teams in his recruitment throughout, as have the hometown across campus, home campus LSU Tigers. He told you that the Aggies are the leaders right now and that there's a good distance to that. Kind of take me through your conversation with Lamar and your takes on where he is. Obviously, he's got a year before he can sign, but a top prospect in Louisiana for that 2026 cycle.
Yeah, and more than that, I think that commitment decision was on his mind last Saturday night in College Station in Kyle Field. But him and his family elected to hold off on making that decision. But we've known that going into his junior season at U-High, LSU, UCF, and Texas A&M, schools like Georgia and Tennessee and Oregon have been knocking on the door and can't seem to crack that lead group. And I think now that the calendar is about to flip to November, I think that it's safe to say that UCF is on the outside looking in. I think it's sort of already morphed into a two-team race. For Lamar to go on the record of saying that A&M is out in front by a long shot, I think that speaks volumes. But I think it more so speaks to, at this point, it is a two-team race. A&M is coming hard. They like Lamar on the defensive line. LSU loves Lamar. They have been the leader behind the scenes for some time, at least until now. I don't think that they're out of this race. And for a kid who's not going to sign for another 13 and a half months, there's still a long ways to go. But at this moment, I think it's the one thing that we know for sure is A&M is legitimate. A&M is not going anywhere in this recruitment, whether it's an early commitment or at the next December. I expect A&M to have the same sort of staying power as long as the staff remains intact that LSU does. And, whether a Georgia or Tennessee or Oregon makes their way into this recruitment after his spectacular junior season at U-High, remains to be seen. But right now, just like we're talking about this rivalry game, there's going to be a lot of big punches thrown between the Aggies and the Tigers for someone who goes to school a stone's throw away from LSU's campus.
I've had such a difficult time throughout his high school career, as much as the Aggies have been involved, as much as UCF was a factor, as much as he has offers from everywhere. I've had a difficult time envisioning that he doesn't end up in purple and gold at the next level, but they're certainly going to have a fight on their hands. You mentioned A&M really liking him at defensive line. What I have felt less sure about is where he ends up in terms of which side of the ball, because he's been such a fantastic player for the Cubs and in camp settings for the last couple of years on both sides of the ball, where when he got to high school, I thought, okay, here's this big defensive tackle coming up through the Cubs program, the way they've had some greats come through there before. And then the first time I saw him really work at offensive tackle, I don't remember if it was I guess it would have been as a freshman, was really blown away by him there. And he obviously could be a guy that ends up being a guard at the next level if he wanted to do that. What do you see from him in terms of best fit, and if all of the programs are kind of looking at him in the same way, or if that varies from destination to destination?
Yeah, I think the majority of schools do like him on the offensive line. I've heard LSU is open to him kind of playing on either side of the ball, kind of, like they opened the alleyway for Dar Rosenthal a couple of years ago. You want to try out D-line, have at it. And I know that, Blake Baker, Joe Sloan, Bo Davis, Brad Davis are all involved in LSU's recruitment. But A&M likes him on the defensive line. listen, when you go to U-High, you love the fact that they get to play both sides of the ball, like Christian Harris did a couple of years ago, or like Keelan does. So for Lamar to do so at such a high level, I think personally he is so athletic. Part of what separates him on the offensive line, his nimbleness, his innate power, his being able to be light on his feet, but also powerful enough to make the blocks in the second level, and also get out in space and block. And I think that he still has room to grow as a potential offensive guard. But you can also talk about guards getting paid quite a bit of money in the NFL right now. You want to say it's a devalued position traditionally, but that's just not the case anymore. And a high-level guard with that level of athleticism, I think that is the ceiling for Lamar if he follows through. But what I do think is as good as he is at the defensive line, I've never seen that second gear. I've never seen just that elite first step quickness from an interior defensive lineman out of Brown that you might see from someone like we mentioned, like a DJ Hicks, who is so quick off the ball that Lamar is strong and he's powerful. He can play with leverage and he can naturally beat up on kids when he's at U-High. But here's my only quip with that is if he was to focus on one position and just strictly train as a defensive lineman, he can reach some untapped potential. But personally, I think that level of athleticism, that functional strength, that ability to make multiple blocks at the second level and out in space, I think it makes for one of the most athletic, almost safe bets at offensive guard in the country.
He's a versatile guy who was very excited to tell me as a young guy that he was playing some 7-on-7 and getting out there and catching some passes. And he's a state championship level track athlete as well for the Cubs. And so there's a lot to Lamar right now. But enough A&M talk. I know Lamar was somewhat A&M, somewhat LSU. I've had enough of it. Let's bring it all back into state and talk about some of the guys that we saw this weekend. Some LSU commits and targets in state. You were up there in Nashville, rubbing elbows with all those bachelorette parties and whatnot that go on up there, and also getting a chance to see LSU commit CJ Jimcoily, who's a guy that I know from afar we're both really excited about, and you had a chance to see him up close this weekend.
Yeah, and he went against a really stout Brentwood Academy team. It was kind of a inner Nashville rivalry game from what I uncovered pregame. But CJ's playing out of position. I can tell you that. He's playing cornerback. I think last year he played a little bit more safety. So if you watch his junior tape, he's so dynamic playing safety. But when you get to see him up close, the first player that kind of reminds me of is Patrick Queen, where he's just a fantastic athlete wherever you put him. The fact, or Christian Harris, kind of these big, I don't want to say he's a jumbo athlete, but he's 6'2", 200 plus pounds. He's able to cover. He's running with Keyshawn Bowman, who is one of the most electric playmakers in the 2027 class, and he's covering him downfield pretty well. So when you think about getting this linebacker core that Blake Baker is bringing into LSU with Keelan Moses, who is a downhill force, with Charles Ross out of North Shore High School, who has 4.4 speed at the position to get after the quarterback and cover sideline to sideline. And CJ Jimcoily, whose dad, of course, played for Frank Wilson over at O. Perry Walker back in the day. CJ, who can defend the run and also provide a pass rush, a true 3-down linebacker, which is so rare. You're looking at three incredibly gifted linebackers that Blake Baker is going to get to toy around with, get to develop some, insert some in on specific situational football. And you love the flexibility and versatility that these guys bring with their speed, their power, their different frames, and various skill sets.
That's what, as much as we've watched how LSU now with Blake there, what they're doing with that star position, I've been really interested with CJ in this class, how he ultimately translates. He's somebody that probably can play some more a true safety type role. He can grow his body into being a linebacker or be that kind of hybrid type role and really be a little bit of a chess piece for Blake that I think he'd have a lot of fun with at that star spot.
Yeah, to me, just being a little bit more familiar with someone like Keelan, who I know has been spending the whole offseason and really has improved dropping back into coverage and has worked on his speed and ability to, his hip flexion. And with Charles, who I've seen play on that North Shore defense, he is a run stuffer, even though he's a little bit on shorter. He's going to fill gaps. He's going to be able to provide a pass rush off the inside, rush off the outside, and then see CJ to be able to drop back into coverage at such a high level. That's just so rare for a linebacker these days. And like you said, if you're going to play these specific star or big nickel roles, you love the ability that you're not losing anything with that kind of athlete, dropping back into coverage, but can also be physical in other ways.
I think Charles has about 300 tackles right now, if I've been keeping track appropriately. Every time I see numbers come out from him from out y'all's way in Texas, they've been pretty impressive. I had a chance on Friday to go up to a game that I'd been looking forward to a lot of this season with Alexandria against Ruston. And so obviously kind of the headliners from an LSU recruiting perspective there are Ash running back JT Lindsay, Ruston cornerback Aiden Anding, and both absolutely lived up to the billing. JT early in that game, Alexandria was pretty much, all right, JT, and then JT, and then JT, and then JT to just kind of set a tone against Ruston, give their young quarterback an opportunity to kind of settle in. And JT ends up with 200 yards total. I think he ends up with 136 on the ground and 2 touchdowns, also 64 as a receiver on little swing passes and things like that, and another touchdown. And to go against that Ruston defense that we all know is phenomenal, and to be able to move piles the way that JT did, continuing to showcase the physicality of his game to go along with that track speed, I thought was really impressive for him, and ends up being a really big win for those Trojans to stay undefeated. Flip side, Aiden on the third of those JT runs to start the game. Aiden comes up kind of limping after the third snap, tries to limp through the fourth snap, ends up out for the rest of that first half, but guts his way through back onto the field in the third quarter and ends up like a blur coming in for an interception. It was a trick play that another, phenomenal prospect, Zarek Hill, the linebacker who's committed to Louisiana Tech, hits the receiver who's trying to throw a ball downfield on I think a second or third down play. And so the ball kind of lofts up a little bit, and Aiden comes flying from out of nowhere to make a diving catch, a guy that had just been sidelined, 30 minutes before that, unloading the speed as well as the ball skills on the diving catch. And so I think a lot to like of what they both brought to the field, including some of the toughness that you saw from both in their own respective ways. And then I think Ahmad Hudson caught more passes in that game than he had in all of the games combined that I'd seen them before. He was a go-to target for Josh Brantley down the stretch as they needed to move the chains on some third and fourth down plays, had a 2-point conversion catch, all those things. And I know I told you early on that this 2027 quarterback class is, in my opinion, going to potentially end up better than the 23 group. And Carson Sellers is starting to kind of etch his name into that conversation. I don't think he's where Pop Houston and Elijah Haven and Malachi Ziegler are just yet, but he was pretty impressive navigating the pocket, showing some poise and some footwork back there, and then getting the ball out to guys like JT and Jimmy Duncan and Darius Washington and company, Tanner Townsend with the game-winning touchdown catch from Carson. So if you haven't heard enough from me yet about Carson Sellers, get ready because it's coming, man.
Let me tell you this. You started off right, because that Ruston defense is no joke. So to put those kind of numbers up, that kind of effort against that defense, to be that productive, for JT to be putting up 200 yards against the Ruston defense. Listen, you're talking about some guys that we know are dudes. Aiden Anding has been stellar, not only as a junior coming back, but his senior season has been remarkable. He's going to be one of the big risers in that region for Rivals. Same goes for JT, who has been absolutely sensational. I think not only proven to be an insane eval by Frank Wilson, but definitely living up to it and playing for that Ash offense. Talk about stereotypes. When you play for that Ash offense, you kind of exude toughness, and that's how he plays. He, being able to slice defenses through the air as well as on the ground. And I think that leads me to my question is, who's going to make it to the Dome between these two teams? Because these are two of my Dome hopefuls.
Well, this is what I told some of the Bearcats, as they were leaving, is they were clearly down after losing back-to-back games. And I haven't looked back to the last time they'd lost back-to-back games, but they lost to Neville last week and lost to Alexandria this week. And I didn't expect that, but what I knew is we're looking at maybe three of the top 4, 5, 6 teams in the state, regardless of any classifications. And so somebody was going to be pretty disappointed with the way some of these games went, and it worked out these last couple of weeks. So it's been Ruston, but Alexandria, because of some of the shifts in recent years, is actually on the select school side. So theoretically, you could end up with Neville and Ruston in one state championship game, and Alexandria versus an Acadiana or a Catholic or a New Orleans Catholic League school, or any number of teams over there that are now under the select umbrella.
The Cougars of Algiers the undefeated Cougars as a possible.
Well, the Cougars are a Catholic League team for years now, and that's the team that I have looked at as the leaders of that Catholic League, and in that mix with those 3 2-5A teams. I think you look at those 3 2-5A teams we talked about, Edna Carr, Acadiana, and Catholic of Baton Rouge as kind of the 6 leaders of the pack to me right now, with a little bit of an edge on some others, and they've all been playing really, really well.
Is it December yet? I can't wait to be back in New Orleans.
Sam's been itching to talk about, okay, who can we talk about our player of the week, player of the year type candidates? I think like 2 weeks ago you threw that out there. So I think maybe next week, going into week 10, we might look at some of that, and just kind of segueing into that, a guy that we're going to have to talk about at that point, but we got some unfortunate news on a few days ago. Nate Shepard had been having as good of a year as anyone for the Mandeville Skippers. We've talked about him most weeks on here, and deservedly so. He ends up with a season-ending injury on Friday night, only got one play, had surgery on Tuesday. And so he's in this process, shaking back. He's high spirits and getting ready for his college career, in mind, and in the meantime supporting his teammates for the undefeated Mandeville Skippers, who are trying to still do some things, but a really big blow for them to be dealing with right now.
Yeah, it's obviously been a theme on this podcast. We've been talking about Nate, and for good reason. He's just had such a spectacular season, to being the central force of that Mandeville offense. Tough blow for the Skippers for the stretch run, but I think looking back at what Nate has accomplished over the past almost 2 years, the playoff run that they went on last year behind him, with him on their back, and the statement senior season he's had, definitely has shown that he is such a dynamic, versatile threat that can slice you in so many different ways. Was supposed to visit Ole Miss this weekend too, which is pretty unfortunate. I know Pete Golding and that staff were taking a look at one of the best in the boot, which they've had a tendency of doing over the last couple of cycles since Pete came back to Oxford. And Duke is getting a good one. Manny Diaz has that program on the rise, and whether it's Duke or if anything changes, there's really not a lot of questions about Nate Shepard. You know what you're getting, and that's a dynamic running back that's going to help you in multiple ways.
I've already been mentally preparing myself for the all-state meetings, because we still have so much season left to go when you consider the playoff runs and whatnot. But I think he's a guy that what he did through the first 7 weeks, there are not a lot of programs in the state that wouldn't happily trade to have Nate Shepard as a lead running back. And so I think he's somebody that, even though he only got those 7 regular season weeks and then, the first play of week 8, that he's someone that, barring something unforeseen the rest of the way, he's someone in my mind deserves an all-state spot at the end of this year.
Well, you're talking about 5A, so JT Lindsay as well is the competition, right? Because Shaw's 4A, right?
Yeah, Shaw's in 4A. I believe we have
a great case for that.
I believe we have 3 running back spots in each class, plus the potential of a flex spot. And so I think JT and Nate, to me, are 2 of the 3 5A running backs right now. And there are some other great ones for sure. But I have a difficult time imagining that that's not 2 of the 3.
Don't come looking for me for an argument.
He's Sam Spiegelman. We'll talk more about some of the awards. almost be like a 2/3 of the way award stuff or a regular season awards. We'll look at some of the top players throughout this season in Louisiana. Hopefully everyone enjoys Halloween between now and then, is safe and whatnot, and we get a less scary weekend from the Louisiana sports teams ahead in between now and next time we have a chance to talk. LSU's off, so they can't upset us. Tulane plays on Halloween night. I don't even know who the Saints play, but I don't want to watch them right now regardless. But we'll see how it all goes, and we'll be back next week to talk about it. Sam, thanks again, as always, for your time. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jared Roser. This is Louisiana versus All Y'all's Recruit That Boot, and y'all be well.
The Saints are a spooky sight.